The Battle of Tennōji in 1615, the climactic engagement of the Summer Campaign of Osaka, represents the final and decisive confrontation between the Tokugawa shogunate and the remnants of the Toyotomi clan, and it marks the end of the last major resistance to Tokugawa rule in Japan. Taking place on June 4, 1615, in the plains south of Osaka Castle, the battle followed months of tension and a previous winter siege that had damaged but not crushed the Toyotomi defenses. After the winter campaign, the Tokugawa had forced Osaka to fill in its moats, a strategic condition that severely compromised the castle's capacity to withstand another assault. Hoping to preserve some degree of autonomy, Toyotomi Hideyori's advisors reluctantly agreed, but the result was catastrophic for their defense. Without the moats, Osaka Castle stood vulnerable, and the Toyotomi faction was left with only one realistic option: open battle. In the early summer of 1615, as Tokugawa forces advanced again toward Osaka, the Toyotomi were compelled to take the initiative. Their army, numbering around 90,000 men, was a mix of seasoned samurai loyal to the Toyotomi legacy and warriors driven by a sense of honor or resentment toward the Tokugawa. Their commanders included veterans such as Sanada Yukimura, Goto Matabe, Kimura Shigenari, and Chosokabe Murichika, each carrying both personal and ideological motivations for resisting the new regime. Opposing them was Tokugawa Ieyasu, retired but still the real authority behind the shogunate, supported by his son and ruling shogun Tokugawa Hidetada. Their combined forces, amounting to over 150,000 troops, represented the might of practically every major daimyo who had aligned with the Tokugawa after Sekigahara. The Tokugawa strategy was one of overwhelming force. They intended to crush the Toyotomi completely, eliminate the last symbol of alternative political legitimacy, and ensure the stability of their new government for generations. The battlefield at Tennōji, an open plain with raised ridges and road networks leading toward Osaka, offered terrain that favored large infantry and cavalry movements. The Toyotomi commanders planned an aggressive and ambitious offensive, hoping to break through the Tokugawa vanguard before the full weight of the enemy could be deployed. They intended to strike hard and fast, leveraging the fierce morale and tactical brilliance of leaders like Yukimura, whose reputation as one of the greatest warriors of his age had already become legendary. The initial stages of the battle seemed to justify this boldness. Toyotomi troops launched a vigorous advance, pushing back elements of the Tokugawa front line and causing notable confusion among the shogunate ranks. Sanada Yukimura, commanding the central detachment, executed a well-coordinated charge that struck directly at the forces led by Tokugawa Ieyasu himself. At one point, the Tokugawa position was destabilized to such a degree that Ieyasu reportedly considered retreat. The intensity of the Toyotomi offensive and the effectiveness of their spear and musket formations demonstrated that the defenders of Osaka, though numerically inferior, possessed formidable tactical superiority in the early phases of the battle. However, the turning point came as the scale of the battlefield began to overwhelm the Toyotomi plan. Despite their initial successes, their forces were stretched thin, and coordination between different commanders became increasingly difficult. The Tokugawa generals, supported by large reserves, began to reorganize and deploy fresh troops into the fray. As more Tokugawa contingents poured into the plains, their numerical advantage gradually neutralized and then crushed the momentum of the Toyotomi assault. The situation worsened when Toyotomi units on the flanks were forced into defensive positions, unable to maintain the pressure needed for a breakthrough. Gradually, what had been a bold offensive began to collapse into scattered pockets of resistance. In the midst of this chaos, Sanada Yukimura made his final stand. Exhausted, wounded, and outnumbered, he reportedly rested beneath a tree before allowing himself to be approached by enemy soldiers. His final words, as later recorded, reflected resignation, but also dignity. His death shattered the morale of the Toyotomi army. For many soldiers, Yukimura had been both their symbol and their strategy,
and with him gone, their will to fight wavered. Meanwhile, the Tokugawa forces pressed relentlessly toward Osaka Castle. Inside the fortress, Hideyori's situation was rapidly deteriorating. Reports of Yukimura's death, combined with the collapse of Toyotomi defensive lines, made clear that the battle and the war was lost. Tokugawa troops breached the remaining outer defenses, and fires began to spread through the compound, whether by deliberate action or chaos of battle. With flames engulfing the castle and enemy soldiers closing in, Hideyori and his mother Yotojimi withdrew to a secure inner chamber. Surrounded and with no escape possible, they committed seppuku, bringing an end to the Toyotomi lineage that had once unified Japan under Hideyoshi. The fall of Osaka Castle extinguished the last organized opposition to the Tokugawa regime. The battle's aftermath was severe. Surviving Toyotomi retainers were hunted down or forced to flee, and Osaka, once a vibrant center of political and commercial activity, came under full Tokugawa control. For the next 250 years, Japan would remain under a stable, though rigid shogunate that enforced isolation, peace, and social hierarchy. The Battle of Tennōji thus stands not only as a dramatic military confrontation, but as a symbolic turning point in Japanese history. It represents the end of the Sengoku era, the closure of a century of civil war, and the final triumph of the Tokugawa vision of order. It is remembered for its intense heroism, tragic finality, and the dramatic contrast between Toyotomi desperation and Tokugawa precision. In the popular imagination, it remains a moment where the spirit of the old warrior age made one last brilliant and doomed attempt to reshape the course of history. Furthermore, the significance of the Battle of Tennōji extends beyond its military dimensions and enters the realm of cultural memory, where it has been romanticized as the final expression of the samurai ideal before the rigid peace of the Tokugawa era transformed warfare into ritualized service. In later literature and theater, especially in kabuki and popular chronicles, figures like Sanada Yukimura became embodiments of loyalty and valor, standing in contrast to the calculated political dominance of the Tokugawa. The fall of Osaka Castle was retold as a tragedy of lost potential, a moment when bravery and individual brilliance could no longer prevail against centralized authority and overwhelming numbers. Yet this narrative also reveals a deeper truth about the transition taking place in Japan. The battlefield was no longer the decisive arena for shaping political destiny. The Tokugawa had succeeded not only because of superior force, but also because they represented a new model of government built on stability, administrative control, and the suppression of independent warlord power. Thus, the defeat of the Toyotomi symbolized a broader cultural and social shift, one in which the era of roaming warlords gave way to a meticulously structured society. The echoes of Tennōji continued to resonate for generations, influencing the way later Japanese viewed conflict, loyalty, and the meaning of heroism. Even during the peaceful centuries that followed, the memory of the Toyotomi's resistance lingered as a reminder that history is shaped as much by the struggles of those who lose as by the victories of those who prevail. And Tennōji became a powerful symbol of a Japan caught between the last fires of medieval warfare and the long calm of early modern rule.